John Nobrega é um pintor e artista visual com uma carreira recheada de sucesso. As suas obras, expostas em galerias de destaque, tal como o Agnes Etherington Museum em Kingston ou o Museu de Arte Contemporânea Canadiana em Toronto, questionam tópicos contemporâneos através da história da arte, emitindo fortes sentimentos de nostalgia e curiosidade na sua audiência.
According to my family, there was never a time when I wasn't drawing. I probably was drawing before I could talk. My dad used to bring home big rolls of paper from where he worked, because he worked at Ontario Hydro. They'd leave me alone for half an hour and the papers would all be covered up with drawings within a very short period of time. From then on, it was just continuing with it. It just took on a life of its own. I never really questioned it. It was always just kind of something that I did. I went to the Ontario College of Art before it was the Ontario College of Art Design, which it is now. I went to that school for about 4 years and graduated with honors.
John descreve a sua fascinação pela pop culture, tema forte na sua coleção.
Well, I didn't really grow up really being aware of art. I knew I liked to draw, I knew I liked to paint, but I wasn't really aware of museums or anything like that. I knew movie posters and record covers and animation and things like that, which is a lot of what the inspiration of this show is, frankly, is pop culture imagery, basically from the 70s and 80s, from the area that I grew up, which is what inspired me. Understanding kind of a sense of contemporary art, that came a little bit later in my late teens, early 20s, when I actually started to become part of the scene. As you know, growing up Portuguese, your scene initially is your family. It's the extended family, it's your cousins, it's all those things. So that was kind of the first scene that I had. Later on, I started, mixing with other artists, and I started learning more about it then, because there were no other artists in my family growing up. So I didn't know anything like that. I just sort of knew what I liked.
John Nobrega relata ter sido dos únicos portugueses da sua geração a decidir explorar as artes visuais. Uma experiência que confessa ter sido estranha, devido à falta de aconselhamento e à incerteza em torno do seu futuro.
When I went to Ontario College of Art, at least the generation that I was probably the only Portuguese person in that class. The generation of people that came after me, sort of the second generation, people a little bit younger than my parents who came here and had kids here, a lot of those people went into arts. A lot of them became actors and musicians. But a visual artist, a painter, a photographer, I'm pretty sure I was the only one of my generation. I had a few cousins that were really brilliant musicians. But in terms of visual artists, I think I was probably the first one of that initial first generation people who were born here in the 70s and 80s. My family were all amazing, very supportive people. My parents didn't really pay attention to what I did, so I was able to develop my own ideas. I never had to make a painting or a drawing and think our mom and dad, our mom and probably gonna, think this is bad or good or anything like that. So I really just worked for myself, which I think is actually really good. I think when you're starting out and you're developing your voice, the best thing to do is to kind of be left alone, and you've got the support, but basically are left to sort of develop your own ideas. So I was never censored, and I was never really, pushed to do one kind of thing or another. So from very early on, my work kind of had its own voice, because I wasn't really anyone else influencing me.
A nossa equipa teve o prazer de visitar a sua mais recente exibição na Galeria de Dre, onde as suas pinturas abstratas foram recebidas com enorme carinho e entusiasmo.
If anything, I've been known up until now for portraits. I've done a lot of portrait work. But this show was kind of a departure, in that it's more almost like abstract paintings, text paintings, and landscapes. The show that I did before this one was a show of mostly nuns, very Catholic imagery, as you can imagine, coming from a Portuguese background. You can never really escape it. That imagery was a big influence on me. Religious imagery comes up over and over again in my work, and whenever it does, I always realize that's very much a product of my childhood. But this show was a bit of a departure from that. This show was really kind of going back to kind of the imagery that I grew up with. Just growing up in Toronto, with movies and magazines and things like that from the 70s and 80s, kind of like an underground culture that was a little bit more interesting, sort of first becoming aware of that. And also when I was doing the work, I had access to a studio that allowed me to do a lot more kind of material paintings where there were a lot more density and a lot more exploration of materials and processes that I was able to do before. So that also influenced this current body of work. So far, it's been received really, really well. And in particular, the people that have known me the longest, They recognize all the references because it's their references too. It's a sort of a generational thing.
Para além da pintura, John Nobrega desponta na sua produção de murais espalhados por diversos edifícios, incluindo um na área de Little Italy, reconhecido por tantos de nós residentes na cidade de Toronto.
I was hired literally right out of art school by a mural painting company in Toronto. They had mostly American clients. And so we did a lot of murals that were shipped down to the States. More recently, I've sort of broken out on my own and I'm doing my own murals. The most recent one I've done would be for the Access Club, the club there on the college, corner of College and Crawford, that was for many years the Mod Club. That was great because, again, it was an opportunity to sort of do a mural that was based on music. It was a very pleasant kind of working situation. I was working for a great client who kind of gave me a lot of creative freedom in terms of developing the imagery of the mural.
O luso-canadiano partilha conselho com os futuros pintores que estejam a assistir o nosso programa.
Well, do it for yourself. Do it for yourself. I mean, and do it for yourself and do it for the 3 or the 4 people whose opinions you actually respect. Make it personal. Make it, because if the more personal it is, the more original it will be, because no one else is you, obviously. Trust your own instincts and believe that what you're doing is interesting, because if it's interesting to you, it'll be interesting to someone else.
As obras de John Nobrega irão continuar a deslumbrar a sua audiência e a cimentar o seu nome na história da arte contemporânea canadiana, sendo um exemplo de coragem e confiança no seu talento.